Good morning. Host, the Reverend Leland Udell. We're glad you tuned in to Adelphia Cable, Channel 15 this morning, and I hope you enjoy the program. We're talking today about spiritual direction, what that is. It sounds very authoritarian, totalitarian even, that you're being directed at what to do with your spirit or God's spirit. But that's really not what we mean. There isn't a good term, and people who do this for a living struggle to come up with a better term, but there doesn't seem to be one. So for lack of a better term, we're still using spiritual direction. And we have a guest here who's been doing spiritual direction for a long time, the Reverend Beverly St. Germain. She's an Episcopal deacon. And she was a staff member at St. Paul's Cathedral, Episcopal Cathedral here in Burlington. She still has a relationship there, and she does spiritual direction. And she's a friend and a professional associate that I've known for many years, and so I'm delighted to have you here, Beverly.
Thank you, Lee.
Really?
Thank you.
I do want to tell our viewers this is a program where you can phone in, and at 12:15 the microphone and telephones are open, and we ask you to call us and to give us your thoughts, your experience, your ideas as you hear us chat. So we have the last 15 minutes of the hour for your input. Please call us. Let me just give you the number so you can jot it down. It's 658-5165. That's the number to reach us right here in the studio, and to be a threesome, make it a threesome. So please call us. So Beverly, I sort of promised you I'd begin, and then we'll have a dialogue.
Good.
Picking up on my statement about spiritual direction, that it's not telling people what the Spirit wants to do with them. You want to add a little bit about the definition of the term spiritual direction?
Well, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, very quickly something came to mind. I was thinking about, it's really not the director, too strong a word really, that is directing something. It's God who is directing something. And the director, which we get so confused in these terms, but is really a facilitator, is someone that helps the individual to find God in their lives. And it's sort of a wonderful detective work, in a sense. I really don't know a good term for it. I think another thing that happens with it, it gets a little confused with spiritual care.
Mm-hmm. You want to differentiate for our viewers?
Well, yes, I think probably spiritual care is something that it's very akin to pastoral care. People are in crisis or in tough situations, and you are able to help them through with a spiritual intonation to the help. Spiritual direction is where you decide that you really want to pay a great deal of attention to your spiritual life, that the time has come to find what it means and to follow it. That's a very big commitment. And spiritual care is usually a more temporary thing. As problems pass, that episode of spiritual care passes also. But with direction, it's an ongoing process that the two of you, and the director is part of that, in a way of receiving from God direction. It's all direction, but the director isn't really the director.
The director doesn't do the work, really.
No, well, yes, in a way, but not the real work, not the work that's important to the whole issue.
An analogy, and you know me, I like analogies. If you really want to swim well, you need a swimming director,
Right,
someone who will say,
instructor.
"Oh, you're reaching up too high in your Australian crawl," or and it takes too much effort and it'll wear you out. It's better you can hold your arm a little bit lower as you reach over the water to take a stroke, and
Exactly.
you're not breathing quite as well as you might if you want to swim better with that stroke. And if you'd like to try some other strokes, we can work on other strokes too. And the swimmer might say, "Well, I've done some backstroke, but every once in a while I have problems with it." And so the swimming coach would say, "Well, tell me about the problems, and maybe sometime I ought to go and watch you swim, and I can give you a little bit more concrete feedback." Does that make some sense?
Oh, yes, I think it's a good one. I don't know, again, the director or instructor, it's sort of just the world's term for something. We enter into it together. It's a joint
How
issue.
about spiritual coach?
Oh, lovely. I never wanted to be a coach exactly, but if it helps.
You don't have to wear a baseball cap.
Oh, good. I almost wore one once,
did.
but I somehow avoided it, and I keep trying to do so. So I think it is something that's not well known. People are not too aware of what that means, and I think your thought about intimidation by the term itself is great. I always felt if we could find another term that would be more inviting, more descriptive, more accurate, it would help. I haven't come up with one.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you like coach?
I don't.
You don't?
Maybe facilitator
Okay.
might be better.
Okay. I just like my swimming analogy, that's all.
It is good.
Because, a lot of people don't swim very well, but they swim.
They swim. That's right.
And there's some who might like to swim better than they swim, and maybe learn how to swim, across Shelburne Bay with a boat going by their side to making sure they don't sink. But they know they can't swim well enough to do that without some coaching, some help.
Right.
And so I guess spiritual direction for me is helping someone who gets along with their relationship with God in a reasonable way, but there's some things they are confused about. There's some things in their relationship with God that they don't quite understand, and they want to learn more about how I get to know God better.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to go back to the analogy because I really think it all feeds in very nicely to going a little further. And that is, if you don't swim well, how long can you go on floating or treading water? Not terribly long.
No,
many
you can't.
times. And when a crisis comes along in the water, if you can't swim, how do you address that? If you have a cramp, or and you can't swim, that's really an issue. The other thing, and probably a very ultimate thing, but if you never learn to swim and you're in a situation where you must swim, you could drown.
That's for sure.
And that can be brought in to the point of the analogy and saying that there is that possibility in life.
Well, are you saying, Beverly, that you can, spiritually speaking, drown?
Absolutely.
You want to tell our viewers a little bit about that? Maybe you never thought that you could drown spiritually.
Well,
but I think it's possible.
I think it is too. I think if you go along in life and hopefully you have some spiritual grounding, some understanding that there is a God and that we're God's creature, God's sons and daughters, But if we do nothing about it and just continue to go about life and doing our everyday job and having our recreation as we always have, and we never really think about it, and we do the things we want, whether that hurts people or not, we just not thinking about it and not doing a thing about it. In that case, you are almost defenseless against something that's going to come along eventually. We all have to be ready for crisis in our life. If we're not ready, we do drown in a sense. We don't know how to handle a crisis.
It becomes too much for us.
That's right.
Like the water would.
Like the water. It's overwhelming like the water. Yeah. It can kill in us the desire for God. We can, oh, so often you hear this. Why did this happen to me? Why did the Lord let this happen to me?
Yeah.
And you've not come to a place where you can understand the crisis or understand life's process. Life is not meant to be a rose garden.
No.
It's full of challenges and pain too. But those challenges and pain can be turned to positive factors. When your belief system is really strong, your faith is strong, you can look to the future and whatever it has to deal with some kind of peace and calm. And to me, that's not the best way to probably say it, but it's the way I'm thinking of it right at the moment.
So you're saying that with spiritual direction, you could be more realistically and adequately prepared for what life might have in store for us, so that when that does occur, as it does one way or another in everyone's life, we'll not drown at that time. We'll be able to emotionally survive.
Correct. I believe that. I've done a great deal of reading in spirituality and before I was a director, and there is so much to support that kind of thing. Look at the world, and it does support that. So that I find it hard to understand why people are not more eager to really process the idea that they really could have God in their lives in a very conscious way, rather than God struggling to be part of their life when they're holding off and not entertaining the thought of welcoming Him in or her in. You must have experienced situations, Lee, in your past with the work you did at the hospital, just as I did, where people, this is true, you see this happen many, many times. People are not ready for crisis. I think the Lord wants us to be ready and wants to be with us in a meaningful way.
But I don't think God wants to make us morbidly ready.
No, no.
Yeah. Check your health insurance program every day.
No, I don't think so either. I think that can also have a detrimental effect. You can drown in morbidity, I imagine. But the point is to be ready in a happy way, if you know what I'm saying. Because God's presence in our life is a happy thing. And every day, even though we have no crisis, we have no problems that are dire that we have to address, when we invite God into our life, He's there in a wonderful presence of light, and it just makes our life so much more realistic in a sense, because God is realism, although we don't usually think that, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking the other day with a former student of mine who's a Roman Catholic religious brother, and he's getting on in years, and we were talking about getting older, and eventually dying even. And he said, "Oh, I'm looking forward to it." He said, "There's so many people who have gone before me, and I really look forward to seeing them again and embracing them and sharing my life more consciously with them in paradise. It's going to be wonderful." I mean,
I agree.
He really meant that. You know?
Oh yes, and I know people that do feel that way, and do mean that. It is wonderful, and it's one reason why we call death new life. And that new life is something beyond what we can understand.
And this particular man has diabetes, and he knows it can be difficult to live with diabetes. It makes every problem more complicated.
Oh, it does.
But doesn't seem to bother him.
That's the welcoming, isn't it, of God in your life. And God's so willing and eager. He loves us very much. If we could understand how much He loves us, we wouldn't hesitate to want Him into our lives. We wouldn't hesitate to be constantly seeking His presence in our lives. But I do think that the final phase in many ways of spiritual direction, you don't need spiritual direction too much after you've achieved what this man did. I think probably you come to a point of understanding there is an afterlife, and that you may get little ideas about what it's like, and you pray about it, and I think the Lord helps us to understand to a certain extent what it's like. So
I had an older Jewish gentleman who was a quite devout Jew who had a heart attack. This was some years ago when I was a chaplain in New York City, and I was standing next to his bedside when he was resuscitated, successfly resuscitated. And because he knew me, when he woke up and looked at me, having been dead, for a minute or two, or three maybe, he looked up and looked at me and he said, "Chaplain, I just met your boss."
Isn't that wonderful?
That's what he said.
I think a lot of people could say that, that have visited the other side briefly, that have been dead for a few moments.
He wasn't confused. He was quite clear in his thinking. Some doctors would say, well, his brain was all confused because of lack of oxygen. That's why he said that. But no.
It's too often the case, too.
Yeah.
I think if it were an isolated incident, the doctors might have a stronger case.
And if the patient went on to be confused, like who am I and where am I and what happened to me, this man was just as with it as the doctor was.
Absolutely.
He wasn't confused.
Yes, I've seen that many times. And they're such an instrument toward helping others to understand life's meaning here and beyond. They really do a wonderful job at bringing people along, in the spiritual life. Their witness is great.
Now, it was said the other day at some meeting I was at that if the Dalai Lama were to come to Burlington and to give a lecture, probably every seat in the house would be taken, and there would be amplification, well, not my amplification, but an electronic hookup with whole nother building so people could sit there. They wouldn't see him except on a television screen, but they could hear him. People are so eager for spiritual direction from, like, the Dalai Lama. Why is it that people don't phone you all the time? Why is it that you aren't as busy as he would be if he were here?
It's a good question. I'm sure I don't have a definitive
he's
answer.
famous. That's
He's
true.
famous. Also,
But
don't you think...
It's more, though.
There is more, and I think one thing more that occurs to me, we as Episcopalians, and I think it's true of other denominations, are not as visible. we are not willing to demonstrate in a very tangible way our faith.
Mm-hmm.
I think that many of the Eastern religions are.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many books written about the experiences of nirvana and all this. We don't really have anything. We do, but we don't do it. We do have communion, the Eucharist, which to us is a very meaningful experience. But it's more than, it's a corporate thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's harder to demonstrate in the way of an individual. I'm not sure, Lee. Do you have any ideas? I've thought about it a lot.
I think one reason why, repeating my question, why people don't line up at our door to get spiritual direction, because you're a spiritual director, I'm also a spiritual director. I only have a very few who come to see me. I think it is because people have distorted ideas about Christianity, and they don't have as much of an idea that you would describe it as distorted about Buddhism. They're more intrigued, maybe ignorant, maybe fascinated, maybe willing to spend time and energy understanding it, but they don't have some of the negative feelings they have about Christianity. A friend of mine, a physician at the hospital that you once knew, he said, religion has caused the majority of all the wars in the world.
Oh my.
And to some degree he's right.
Yes, there's been quite a few you could say that
about. And I mean, look at our beloved Church of England. At one time, we were giving a very hard time to the Chinese back at the turn of the century because they wouldn't buy the opium they were making.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted the Chinese to use good English opium.
Yes, well.
And so I mean, people remember that, and the whole way Mahatma Gandhi struggled against the British Empire in India. People remember that, so it turns people against established Western religion, I think, and so a lot of people are looking to other religions because they only have negative experiences with Christianity.
True. I couldn't help but think when you said about Gandhi. Do we have any living heroes in the Western world in Christianity?
Oh, sure.
Do you?
Well, you know that.
Yes, I do. I'm just asking. Would you say that they measure up with Gandhi and others like him?
In a different way, but Albert Schweitzer, Bonhoeffer, who was a professor at my seminary. There are many. There have been some Roman Catholic people martyred down in Central America.
Why don't you think people relate to those heroes, those martyrs, or the way that they relate to the Eastern heroes, figures?
Martin Luther King.
Now that's one they do, but we don't have too many where people really would know right away who they were. Bonhoeffer.
But they don't think of Martin Luther King as a Baptist minister. They think of him as someone who was breaking down prejudice.
That's right. That's another issue too.
He never stopped being a minister,
no.
a black, a Baptist minister.
But again, it's stepping out and going ahead with things that others, where people fear to tread. I mean, it's really, I think in order to be a hero, you have to put self aside and go for the common good. And I'm afraid in a society such as we have, that is not really entertained very frequently.
Well, you know how it is with as kids grow up, they want to do something different than their parents. I remember my mother had an Electrolux vacuum cleaner. When I got married, I said to my wife, I don't want an Electrolux vacuum cleaner. So we got a Hoover, you know, big deal. I mean, there was.
Search yourself.
I wanted something different than what we had at home. There was nothing wrong with my mother's Electrolux.
No.
It was a good machine. I wanted my own identity. And so I think, still trying to answer your question, why people might be more interested in looking at Buddhism than Christianity is they don't want what their fathers and their grandmothers and their great-grandparents had, that Western religious stuff. They want to try something new.
I think that's a strong point. It really is. Well, like your Hoover and the Electrolux, but I wonder too, going right along with that,
Sure.
it's a very, the Eastern religions, Buddhism, are very, what do I want to say, exotic. They offer something of the unknown in a way that, again, I'll say, a little more demonstrable than what we offer. And therefore a little easier to get perhaps drawn in. I mean, there are lots of books even that give you ideas of how to progress within a certain discipline. We have some, but not quite in the same way. But I do think youngsters today, and rightly so in many cases, wish to be different, have a different life, do different things with their lives. I agree in many ways. They have to. Their identity depends upon it. Yeah. They are not their mother or their father, so they have to look that way. The only problem being, it would be nice if all the religions and faiths had an equal shake. You know, I don't know. I just feel it's too bad to throw the baby out with the wash and say, I'm going entirely away from this.
I have a gentleman friend who's a guest on my program here who's a Muslim, and he was not raised here in America nor born here. Grew up elsewhere in Asia Minor, we would say, I guess. And when I asked him closely about some of the behavior of nearly 100% Islamic countries, which seemed sometimes to be regressive and destructive of the place of women and other things, he said, that's not the tenet of Islam. That's that national image, that's that cultural custom, but that's not Islam. Don't confuse the two. So I think a lot of people think of the United States of America as a Christian country, one nation under God. Remember?
Yes.
We added that.
Yes.
I heard on a quiz show that was added in the 80s, I guess. Yes. And that turns them off because, in other words, the United States is supposed to be equivalent with what Christianity is all about. No, thank you. You know.
Sort of forcing you into it.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
But anyway, let's get back a little bit more to what spiritual direction is. Why don't you tell our viewers? I'm putting you on the spot. What do people say? What do they talk about when they come to you the first few times, and what do you say to them? Can you give us some examples, concrete examples, so people can understand this process that often people know little about?
I'd like to start by saying it's usually when someone comes, they say something about, oh, this is frightening. I really don't know that I can do this. It just frightens me. I wonder what I often wondered what that was all about, but it can be many things according to the individual. Excuse me. People come for various reasons. They are not aware yet of exactly what spiritual direction is because we're not aware of it out there. Really, it's a misnomer anyway, and therefore, what is it? Usually I talk with them first about what they expect from spiritual direction. And there are many answers. And of course we proceed according to where they are, where I am within that frame. And we do our very best to find their identity within the life God has given them. We try to find such things as what their spiritual gifts are, which is always a very solid place to start, because we all have them. Whether we know what they are or not is one thing, but starting there is a really good place to start, because they identify you as God's daughter or son. So that's usually what we do. Some of the questions they ask are like the questions they ask in life that we hear so often, which we've already touched on. Things like, I had this horrible thing happen. Why did God let that happen to me?
Yeah, and then, there's this false notion that we hear people saying, God must have done that because he's testing me.
Or punishing me, which is even worse.
Yeah.
No, that isn't a God. We have not a God that does that kind of thing.
No.
I think the hard thing is to know these things are inherent in the world. And the thing that gets us through them is our faith, which includes our spiritual gifts. So that it's very hard. That's a very large barrier to cross with someone.
One?
To get them to the point to understand God did not send anything to test them. God did not send anything to punish them. Excuse me. That's the first barrier, usually, is to answer questions, questions that can come down to, why is my child retarded? And so on, or why, even such things, why am I single when I want to be married? You might think that's not a spiritual situation, but it really is many times. So we just investigate, and we do so by, again, finding their identity as God's child, God's son or daughter. Many times it takes a long, long time to get to a point where there are real solid answers for that person.
You know what parents used to say when they would spank their children, I'm doing this for your own good.
Oh, taking God's place, as these people would think, right?
Yeah, well, I think that reverberates in people's minds.
Yes, it does.
God is doing this for your own good.
I wonder if we've ever thought about why we really are maybe in this world. Maybe there are other answers that we have to proceed toward, pain and challenges that are hard and so forth. And I think it's a vast subject, but often that's something that we start to talk about, usually is eventually, in spiritual direction.
So you're not, generally in spiritual direction, you're not talking about my neurosis or my problem at paying the bills or my frustration with my child that cries all night and has colic. That's not what you talk about, is that right?
Well, it may be part of what we talk about because we're looking for something beyond it. And I'm not there to solve the problem of the crying child or not having enough money, or I can't solve that per se. And I'm not trying to solve anything except to try to help you to solve what the Lord will help you to solve. And it works. It really is a wonderful thing. Lately, I have been doing some studying, which is just a marvelous piece of work that I'm studying. I don't know, am I allowed to say a saint's name, Lee?
Oh, sure.
St. Ignatius,
Sure.
in his exercises. And there's been some modern books lately written on it, too. I know one, anyway. But trying to find the answer to some question you have, whether it's good for you, trying to make a decision about something in your life, such as how do I find a way to pay my bills, or coming up prayerfully with some kind of answer and being able to go through these prayerful exercises and asking the Lord, is this the way? Now, people usually do that, you know, when they pray. People that pray seriously, they do that. They ask, Lord, help me. I've got this horrible problem, help me. And sometimes the Lord will do that in a demonstrable way, but sometimes we don't see that he is doing that. So this exercise of St. Ignatius helps us to see why he may not be doing that.
No, tell us.
Well,
Tell us.
it's rather involved, but
Okay.
the main thing is to place it before God in prayer, to ask God for spiritual consolation or sensible consolation with regard to your problem and your question. And then to go about your daily life in prayer, as you do usually, and wait. What will happen if you start, when you think of your answer that you're asking God about, you will become more and more fired with it. You will, if you are asking God about, say, a vocation, and you go ahead with the vocation in a beginning way, and you find you are just so happy. Everything seems to be just right. Then you have really received an answer to your prayer.
So that kind of experience takes place.
It does take place. And in spiritual direction, we can facilitate the prayerful life in the way to have this happen to you if you are
Well, then,
so minded.
in your role with someone looking for spiritual assistance, might you say, that's not just a lucky break, that's not just a coincidence. God is answering your prayer. Would you say that?
I would say that. I would say it's not a coincidence. And one of the things is the spiritual consolation or the sensible consolation. The sensible consolation is very much more, perhaps easier than the spiritual. If you say you have a job that you have found and you've decided to go ahead with it and you begin, as I said before, you become so much a part of that job. You even enjoy it, heavens. And this is your this is your sensible consolation with a job. Then the spiritual consolation often happens with more spiritual episodes of your life. I want to learn more about why I can't accept some tenet of our faith. And so you use the same method and you will receive spiritual consolation to understand. It's a very involved thing, so it's not something I could stay here and go into very deeply. It's something that needs to be one-on-one with a particular situation. But it is wonderful to see prayer work so well, and I give so much thanks to St. Ignatius for writing this all down in his exercise book, and I really recommend it.
He was the one who started the Jesuits, right?
That's right. Yes. Very
So you're telling us that in specific, concrete ways, God not only knows our situation, but that God interacts with us and changes things in our lives, not necessarily making everything rosy, but still making life more than possible, more than bearable.
More than bearable. I don't like the word happy, but it does give us a greater sense of
peace.
Peace. You will know it. It isn't happiness only. It isn't peace only. It's a very special quality all by itself. I don't deny that we look for happiness, and we probably would do anything to have happiness. And proof of that is sort of the supermarket spirituality we have in some cases today. People are searching for something, but I'm afraid they're taking a little wrong turn now and then. There again, someone speaking of it together and exploring it together can find some answers to just what your situation is and why you may be going through it, even some of the reasons that seem to be obvious. But alone, it's hard to search through. It's hard to take that path alone. You really need to talk about it and be with someone that understands where you're going.
Can you tell our viewers why, well, this is a tenet of mine. I guess I'm asking you to
all right.
bolster up what I'm feeling, which isn't quite fair, but why don't you comment about it? I feel that the average pastor of a church or rabbi of a synagogue or a Muslim lay leader isn't either trained or necessarily highly interested in doing spiritual direction. Not that there's anything wrong with them or that they're necessarily lacking, but that they would have other things that they would be doing in their ministry. Do you want to, so that you need to find someone like yourself who is a spiritual director if you want to deal with some of these life issues.
Yes, of course you do. I think I'll just briefly say, I think most pastors are so involved in their administration of a church and trying to deal with the more physical needs of people that they haven't, and their spiritual care as well, they haven't time to really have many people that would be seeking spiritual direction. They haven't time to go into that to any extent. I think probably too, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it because I believe it. I think so often a rector or pastor of a church has a different emphasis perhaps in their daily ministry, that in order to keep the church going physically and spiritually too, that they just cannot spend time doing that. Spirituality too, for a long time, I think, it's just coming to be different, has had a somewhat negative press. People have felt that it was something that only certain kinds of people would take part, both in the the leadership role or the people that would come for help. So I think that too, Lee. So it's hard to find a spiritual director, but a good pastor, which I think we have good pastors, good rectors, will know how to set you looking, where to look, maybe give you a little list of names, and it's up to you. It really is up to you. No one is going to take you aside and say, I really think you need a spiritual director. Why don't you go find one? No one is going to do that. You've got to do it for yourself. And the way I would recommend is that you first start with your church. If there's nothing in your church, investigate other churches that may have something set. We know in our church we have 3 at least that do spiritual direction. I would hope and I would think other churches have a fairly similar number. How'd you find your spiritual director, Lee?
Well, I usually ask God to help me.
That's a good way.
And to open my eyes so I can see see that person really is the right one. Because sometimes I'm prejudiced and don't think of it. My own present spiritual director is a Jesuit at Boston College, and it's a little awkward to get down to Boston to see him, but I phone him, and I have to be in Boston 4 or 5 times a year anyway, and so I usually spend a day with him, and sometimes we'll stay at the rectory and see him on 2 days. He's very generous. I met him at he was one of the retreat directors at a 8-day silent retreat I went to, and he was assigned to me. And when I first, and I say this for our viewers because when I first met him that first evening, when I and about 8 other people, we all were assigned to him, and then there were other directors for other people, and we met, and he talked a little bit about his approach, and my initial thought was, oh, do I have to put up with him for 8 days? And so then the next day I saw him with my private time, and he was just the right person. But my initial response to him was a negative one. So I think you need to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
And God's eyes to see and ears to hear. I think that's true. I think, of course, the first thing is we hope people have prayed about having a spiritual director before they come. But it is interesting how you might feel that this is not the person for you. You know, the first exposure can be that. And I think that's a careful consideration, don't you? When you first start spiritual direction, is to be open, both parties to be open to the idea it may not be right in this particular case. And I've had that happen. I've sent people on their way to someone that I felt would be closer to what they needed.
A few years later, at the same retreat house, I was assigned another person, and she was terrible. It wasn't because she was a woman. I mean, it was...
It better not be.
No. No, I had some marvelous women directors but at that retreat house, but this particular one was bad news. You said something that I wanted to comment on, and maybe you want to elaborate some. I think the general public, particularly the mainline Christian public, hasn't really thought that it's possible to be close to God. It's possible to hear God speaking in our hearts. That's for saints, that's for mystics, that's for eternity, for when I die and I'm in paradise, but not me. That's not for me. I have my feet on the ground. I really, and that wouldn't be for me. And so therefore, since spiritual direction is a means to realize the presence of God in your life, a lot of people don't think that they're supposed to know God in this life, that all the things that they read in Scripture about the relationship of God with us are not really for us. They were for the saints, the prophets, the martyrs, the patriarchs, the evangelists, and the Hebrew Scriptures in the New Testament, but not for people like us. And that somehow God stopped relating to people like in that way after all the Christian disciples died, and maybe after the prophets and the Hebrew Scriptures were no longer walking the earth. You think that you have that experience?
Oh, I think that's true. It's that spirituality thing is a thing other and not part of life. It's something over there that we sort of know it's there, but we really don't feel part of it in any way, and yet we are part of it every day, every way. God is with us in all of our lives. So, but you can't really, I find if people are not ready to accept that, you really aren't, they aren't ready to begin, you can't begin there. There has to be some recognition that they are spiritual beings as well as physical beings, and that the spiritual part is really the greater part. That's quite a large step. But if anyone has any doubts about what, the validity of spiritual things, spiritual life, spiritual episodes, I think the best thing to do is to, there's several things you could do, actually. Probably a good book, a simple, good book on spirituality, or on, like, Margaret Gunter's book on holy listening, or something, it's a thin book, it's not any real difficult thing to read. And there are many of them. If you go to a bookshop that really specializes in books, and I won't give the name, I imagine that's not allowed, but anyway, we do have one that's really, and the owner of that bookshop is so very knowledgeable. So that a good book might be a good place to start. If you don't feel like you want to read or whatever, you might try to find a spiritual director that would just meet with you once and see if it's right.
It's like you want to buy a new car. You want to test drive the car you might want to buy. You don't have to buy it because you're testing it.
Absolutely. I think that's a good analogy. You and your analogies, they're really good. This is true, and in order to drive your life, in order for your life to be in the right lane, let's say, God has to be part of that driving. To drive alone through life is really very sad.
It is.
And I can see where so many people find sadness to be the overwhelming part of their lives.
Because there certainly are difficult times in all of our lives.
Oh, and definitely, yes.
It's time for our viewers to phone in, so we hope you will flood our office here with your calls. Our phone number is 658-5165. 658-5165. We'd like you to participate with us and to join us here audibly. Please call that number. We would like you to keep us honest, and we'd like to see if we've confused you or hopefully clarified things. Please give us a ring, and we'll talk. My guest is the Reverend Beverly St. Germain, Episcopal deacon and spiritual director. We will talk together here about the subject of spiritual direction until we hear that you're on the line, and then we'll be quiet and listen to you for a change. So please call.
Good.
Now, maybe I cut you off.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I just had a thought, however, really about coming to a spiritual director. It's not the best time when you are in crisis. It'd be better to seek spiritual care.
Right.
Spiritual care is, I'm sure, available in your church, and if you have no church, I know that there are churches that would welcome you and help you in a spiritual way. So
I may suggest that you also not just use the word church, but synagogue or mosque.
Exactly. To me, it's a generic term, but I guess it really isn't.
Not for people who are not church members.
Or, exactly. So I would recommend that you go to a synagogue or a church or a temple or whatever that you know has spirituality as its reason for being, and seek spiritual care first. Then After your crisis is over, you may wish to go further into the spiritual life, and then it's a really good time to begin to look for a director by prayer, as Lee said, or by just inquiring around the various churches. I want to say, too, that most churches, I think, maybe you correct me, Lee, if I'm wrong, but most churches welcome anyone for spiritual direction. You don't have to be a member of that church. Now, if that's a problem, be in touch with Lee and I. We'll find you a place to start.
You can write us care of the Adelphia Channel 15 studio here in South Burlington.
I really want no one that desires it not to be able to find it. That is the ideal situation. Is it's there for everyone. Something we talk about a lot in our committee, and how are we going to be sure people understand this? And granted, there aren't many, Lee.
No.
You know, we're a rather small group, but I think it's becoming more known, and hopefully we will accrue membership and have a wide number of people to offer.
2 minutes.
Oh, I wish someone would call. I would feel so much more. Wouldn't you?
I would. I agree. We're talking about spiritual direction, about how you personally can find God operative in your life, and how to cooperate with that God you perceive. And our guest is the Reverend Beverly St. Germain, an Episcopal deacon who.
We have less than 2 minutes and we will call.
Okay. Well, someone heard us.
Wonderful.
Welcome. Thank you for calling in.
Hi, Lee. Hi, Bev.
Hi.
It's Peggy.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi.
What's on your mind today?
What is on my mind? Well, a couple of things, quickly.
We have 2 minutes.
Okay. One is, I've been sitting here thinking, instead of the word spiritual direction, why not spiritual guidance?
Oh,
Well, that's a good term.
good idea.
It's a good idea. We'll
I think direction would guidance would maybe bring people closer, to someone. Because you're really guiding people.
It's a good.
Instead of directing them.
You're right.
It's a good thought. We will reflect on that.
Yes.
And the other thing is, quickly, is that I believe that the Holy Spirit if the Holy Spirit is with someone, that the Holy Spirit can also guide you to someone who can help you with your spiritual life. And help you to click with someone. I have found that very helpful.
Good.
Very helpful.
So prayerfully you
Prayerfully.
sought.
Yes, it has to be a prayerful thought. You have to really put a lot of time into it. You can't just go to someone and say that this is going to be the person. You have to put a lot of prayerful thought into who you want as a spiritual guidance person.
Good words, Peggy.
Thank you, Peggy.
You're very welcome.
Thank
you for giving us that input.
You're very welcome. Bye now.
All right.
Perfect
Bye-bye.
timing.
Goodbye now.
Bye.
Thank you, Beverly,
You're
for being here. Our time is up. We've been talking about spiritual direction with a spiritual director, the Reverend Beverly St. Germain. I hope you enjoyed yourself too here, Beverly.
I did indeed. Thank you for having
Good.
me, Lee. I hope we
Good.
get a lot of inquiries.
We may.
Inquiries,
We
yes.
may. We may. You can always write us, care of Adelphia Cable, Channel 15, here in South Burlington. And I'm the Reverend Lee Udell, and I can pass anything on that you send us to Reverend Beverly St. Germain. So we await hearing from you.